Hello and welcome to the Think Liberty podcast. I'm Vinny Marshall and this is episode 32. We're a day late, but that's fine. It's better than missing the episode completely. On this episode, I'm joined by some of our regulars. We almost have the old podcast crew back together here. Chris is joining us this evening. How you doing, Chris?
Oh, I'm doing great. How about you, Vinny?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for asking. We've got Lonnie.
Yeah, I'm doing good too. How are you?
I love it when you guys all ask me how I'm doing. I'm going to tell you I'm doing bad. Caitlin is joining us as well. How are you?
I'm doing great.
All right,
Glad to be
awesome.
back on the podcast. I haven't been on in a while.
Yeah, I know. Glad to have you. You got all your internet stuff finally sorted out.
You're supposed to ask if he was doing.
Well, I figured you guys covered that already.
Yeah, I'd been asked a couple times.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on this episode, I was thinking, we don't have a guest to interview, and I mean, there's topics to cover, and we can go over a few of them. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit before we get into our larger topic about what's going on in North Korea right now. Holy moly! So it seems Trump has made his way out there, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he's the first U.S. president to meet with a North Korean leader.
That is correct.
Yep. And from the sounds of it, it's hard because there's not a lot of details out right now. A lot of this stuff is kind of kept under wraps, but it seems like North Korea has agreed to denuclearization and Trump is going to drop sanctions. Did anyone else hear anything about that?
I've been paying pretty close attention to it. Apparently they agreed to denuclearization, and I saw a video clip of when him and Kim Jong-un were actually signing the agreements. And there was a lot of press questions, but Donald Trump was staying pretty quiet about it and kind of secretive. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to come out about it later. And I'm not suspecting any huge major things that are going to be bad from it. And that's why he's secretive. I'm not too suspicious, of course, more than usual, which is pretty suspicious. Anyway, so yeah, it's pretty amazing and kind of cool. I heard about that when he arrived in Singapore, was it, that the hotel actually threw him a birthday party, which was kind of cool.
Was it his birthday?
It's his birthday in a couple days, from what I understand.
Huh.
So
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
How about you, Lonnie? You heard anything about this?
I've been kind of, same kind of keeping track of it a little bit, but not too much. Like, I didn't know about the sanctions thing. I think that would be great. I know in the podcast that we actually discussed North Korea a while back. Oh, shoot, I don't know how many episodes ago that was. We talked about how that would be a great improvement for them and would probably be the best thing that we could do. And if that's the deal, then I think that's great. I do know that if you would have told me a couple years ago that we'd be talking about peace with North Korea, I wouldn't have believed you. If you would have told me that Dennis Rodman and Donald Trump would be the ones responsible for it, I would have said you were smoking crack. But here we are. This is the strangest timeline, but this is the one we are in.
Right. You got the CNN, video going around where you got Rodman with the MAGA hat on and the pot coin shirt, and it's just like, right, man, what a time to be alive.
It's something. I mean, you can't write this. Like, no comedy writer in the world could write this. It's just amazing.
I thought that the pot coin shirt was actually that was an edited picture. And I was like, wait, what? Like, I have to figure out if this was actually real. And then saw the video clip of it, and I was like, that dude actually advertised cryptocurrency on CNN wearing a MAGA hat.
Oh, it's great. It's great. The first time I saw the image, it was like a still of the side by side with Rodman and what was it, Cuomo that he was interviewing with. And I was like, this is fake, right? Like, this has to be fake. This isn't real. And yeah, it's real. That's crazy. Totally insane. Caitlin, how about you? Any thoughts on what's going on with North Korea?
I think it's great, that they're talking. I mean, that's something that we haven't done since the war, basically. I don't know if I trust it. Because, okay, so the US is committing to providing extra security guarantees to North Korea in exchange for a commitment to denuclearization. But the language gets kind of tricky. It's a commitment to denuclearization, not denuclearization itself. Like, there was no set deal for denuclearization on North Korea's part. And there's no peace treaty. Like, there's no actual signing of a peace treaty between North and South Korea. Because, I mean, the war ended on a truce. That's not, I mean, it's not really solid. So I'd like to see what else comes out of this. I'm sure there's a lot that they haven't told us, obviously. I mean, I'm sure only like a percentage of it gets back to like the people. So I don't know. We'll
I'd like
see.
to think.
I don't
I'd like to
trust it.
think that all of that is being worked on, and that maybe, like you said, we're only hearing a portion of it. I hope that we see that peace treaties between North and South Korea, peace treaties between us and North Korea. I mean,
Yeah,
that would be great. You know, that's the
yeah.
best
It would
solution
be great if we
to all
saw
of
it,
this.
but I don't
Yeah.
know if we will.
I feel like it's baby steps kind of at this point, and also, you know, like we said before, that it is kind of secretive and not all the details are there. But yeah, I definitely agree. Like, that's a goal for their administrations to definitely shoot for, and I think this is big progress. So
Indeed.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think is really funny about it is like this whole all the Democrats and the progressives, like everyone on the left, just basically hating everything that Trump does. I do find it funny. While I'm sure there are things about the way that Donald Trump handled this, much like anything else that Donald Trump does, I'm sure you can criticize it, but in general, this is a good thing, right? You don't want to have countries with giant weapons pointed at each other, ready to pull the trigger at any moment. And you know, I'm already seeing people complaining about the United States, saying that they're going to stop the the military training exercises with South Korea, that claiming it's going to lead to war. And it's just insane, man. You get these mental gymnastics from people that are talking, they just want to be able to attack Trump in any way possible, and they are talking about the fact that, you know, doing this and trying to do things to move forward with a peaceful resolution is going to lead to war. It's some good stuff there.
Yeah, it really shows how pro-war the supposed anti-war left really is.
It's crazy, man. It seems like a lot of these people were just affected on such like a core emotional level by Donald Trump being elected into office, that, you know, where people used to talk about issues and policies and topics, it's just always Trump now. There's a lot of this stuff I see where it's just people are just, you know, anything he does, they're chomping at the bit to try and find a way to bring something up that'll be impeachment worthy. And it's just, in doing so, they just hyper focus on Trump all the time. And it's a strange thing to watch, because these people are just obsessed with him. They claim to hate him, they claim to not like him, they claim to want him out of office. This is all they can talk about.
it was kind of similar, but not to this extent, I would say, with Obama, where
Oh, yeah.
there was a lot of, it was like flip the switch on it. There was a lot of people on the right that were, you know, looking for impeachable offenses. You know, there was the birth certificate thing that happened, and there was, you know, all this other kind of stuff. But, and I'm not saying that everybody, you know, who was against Obama did this, but, you know, there's definitely like fringe elements, but they were a lot of times kind of grasping at straws with it, and it was hard
Totally.
it was hard to, for me, like at the time being a Republican, to kind of say to these people like, "Oh, don't you think you're kind of overstepping there? Don't you think there's like bigger things that you could go after, bigger criticisms?" And then they'd be, you know, of course, call you a libtard and go away, you know. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I was the one I I saw a good one, you know, the other day here, as I was watching one of these groups, and someone made this post about Trump's height, and they were talking about how he I guess like he was like, oh, Trump says he's 6'3", but here he is next to Trudeau, and he, you know, he's 6'2", and he looks 6'2". Like, we're talking about an inch here. And then he goes, he's got Google to lie for him too. And I didn't even interject other than like, this is stupid. But like Google is not like as a search engine, right? Like Google is just going to give you a page that says something, right? So if on Donald Trump's Wikipedia, it says he's 6'3", Google's going to kick out the Wikipedia data. It's not that Google is favoring Trump. I think everyone knows that the entities that work for and control Google are probably not the kind that generally tend to favor Trump.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, with all of this, of course, it's right and healthy to be skeptical of everything. I mean, being skeptical of government action is why we are all libertarians or anarchists. Is that not true? So, yeah, of course, approach all of this with a healthy dose of skepticism and be wary of what's going on. But sometimes what's happening is exactly what's happening, and I hope that's the case here.
Yeah, and okay, so on that vein, going in there, we talk about questioning government, being libertarian. So on this episode, this has been coming up a lot. Now we've had a few items lately in the news that are focused around police brutality, and it seems to be getting, I hesitate to say it's getting worse because I don't have any hard data in front of me, and with the way that the media covers things, sometimes things seem louder than there actually are a problem. So I won't say that it's been happening more, but it's been getting a spotlight on it in the news cycle more. And it's this police brutality all over the place, right? You've got the Shaver case that wasn't so long ago, and then now, obviously, there was a whole bunch of crap in there before. You had the kid that was in his backyard, or his grandma's backyard, or something with a cell phone, and he got shot. It's just happening all over the place now. So recently, you had this girl on the beach, and the cop, punches her in the head and throws her down for basically not wanting to do as he says. But the caveat there is she didn't do anything wrong. And it at least in the beginning, right? You have the body cam footage, and he was asking her for her ID, asking her to, and she apparently passed a breathalyzer a few times, and she just didn't want to give him her information, and he got pretty pissed off at that and came at her. And then I guess after that, I read a report that she spit at him. I didn't see it on the video though, but you got that. And so he just starts taking off, throws her down, punching her in the head. And now there's this other video. I don't know if you guys have seen it. This guy standing up near an elevator, and he was on his cell phone. And I think there were like 3 or 4 cops surrounding him. Have you guys caught this one? We just posted it to our page, actually.
Right. I was actually just watching that before we got on the podcast. So.
Yeah, well, what's crazy about this one is, man, that guy really gets his ass kicked. That cop is, he's not a light hitter, it looks like. And he hauls off and just starts punching this guy in the face repeatedly. Apparently, in the video, I haven't watched it with the sound on yet, but apparently in the video, the police are asking this guy to sit down, and apparently he refuses. Did you watch it with the sound on, Chris?
I did, but I cut off because I had to come in here. So yeah, but the first part of the video, like that's what they're asking him. You're correct in that vein.
Yeah. So with all that said, what's going on, and we're talking about Trump and North Korea and stuff, I wanted to talk about sacred cows on this episode. Stuff that you talk about and people just generally tend to just really have a hard time even talking about it. I think police are definitely one of these topics. You watch these videos, and to me, what I take from it is, when you have that much authority and you have that much power, the most frustrating part about this stuff is we, like, on our page, on our Think Liberty Facebook page, we put up that video, and a bunch of people come in and they respond with, look, the police asked the guy to sit down and he didn't. All right, and I get that. I understand that part, but that's not a reason to start kicking the shit out of somebody. Right? When you have that much power, you have that much authority, I understand a desire to have citizens follow orders. There's better ways to get things done than just to start hauling off and kicking the shit out of somebody if they're not listening, especially if they've done nothing wrong. I mean, this guy was searched for weapons prior. to what we saw in the video. He had nothing on him, right? And this is the same thing with that girl on the beach. You know, just the guy's asking her for information. And in this situation, she doesn't need to give it to him. She didn't do anything wrong, right? But this cop felt it was justified to haul off and start punching people in the face. You get the shaver video. That thing's heartbreaking to watch. The guy's sitting there on his knees with his arms in the air, begging for his life. When is this too much? You know, when are people going to be able to start hearing this stuff? So, we'll go through the list here. Caitlin, this time we'll start with you. Maybe share with us some experiences you've had talking about, you know, the recent state of what's going on with police to people that may not be libertarians.
It's really difficult to have these conversations with people because they hold police in just the highest regard, and you know, they see any action against police during any kind of encounter as, well, you deserved it. You didn't listen to them. You didn't follow orders. Like there's such a thing as measured response. So not listening to a police officer is not a reason to get, you know, your ass kicked, but people just can't hear it. They stick to the hard line of, well, you should have followed the law and you wouldn't have got your ass kicked, or you know, just stuff like that. It's really through to people, and I haven't quite figured out a way to frame the argument so people will listen, because it's such a I don't know, it's really hard for me to understand that point of view, that you know, it's okay to kick the shit out of somebody because they didn't, you know, sit down, or they wouldn't give you their ID whenever they didn't have to. Like I can't understand that position, so I haven't found a way to get through to them yet.
Yeah, it's tough. It's really hard to bring it up because, like you said, most people have it. Like we had Kyle Wagner on here not long ago, and he, as Kyle does, he had pretty much the position of like, well, look, if you don't listen to the cops, they're going to kick the shit out of you. I mean, just because it's turning up to be true more often than not doesn't mean it's okay. But that's a good point. It is hard to find those talking points to when you can break through and have an actual conversation without someone getting, you know, pissed off. How about you, Lonnie? Same question for you, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like y'all said, it's like they're, oh well, all you got to do is just listen to them, and oh well, if you talk back or if you give them attitude, and it's like, look, they're not my parents. You know, had I, you know, mouthed off to my mom, I would probably got smacked. Done the same thing to my dad, and probably would have got smacked. However, me doing that as a child and parent responding that way in a way to teach me not to do that, the cops aren't my parents. I don't have to do that, and they should not be, I guess, being there to punish people, to teach people lessons. That's something that I don't understand, and the way that people view that as if that's part of their job, I don't understand. I don't see how that's something that police should be doing at all. Now, yeah, of course, we know that, you know, if we have to deal with police, you know, it's best to be as calm as possible so that you don't get, you know, your butt kicked or whatever. I mean, but at the same time, it's like you shouldn't have to live in fear that you might do something wrong or move a little bit too fast, or in my case where I put my hands in my pockets at a traffic stop. Oh my God, that went over really well. I mean, it's just too much, and I just don't understand the mindset of people that just justify it and think it's perfectly okay. I never really get anywhere with any of those conversations because it's just so hard to see that side.
All right, sorry about that. Yeah. It's tough because, well, like I said there, it's, you're seeing more instances of police brutality happen, but you're not exactly. I'm sure that most times are not the things that we're seeing on videos. I'm positive of that, right? This isn't now all of a sudden the mean, but it is concerning. It's very bothersome because as a police officer, you have to assume that that's going to happen. That's a possibility, right? And that's something that can happen. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, someone that has so much power and authority should be. It should be accepted, or at least known, that they need to act with responsibility in those times. We had David on here, the Kyle episode, talking about a nurse can't just start hauling off and hitting people that are difficult, and we all know that hospitals deal with a whole bunch of people that are difficult. So it's very bothersome indeed. So Chris, how about you, buddy?
Well,
what's your take on this one?
This is a pretty sensitive topic, and it's very prevalent, like you mentioned, Vinny. But I would like to touch on something that Caitlin brought up, and that was the idea of, she mentioned metered response, and with a lot of these measured response. Sorry, so
no, all good.
So with a lot of these situations that you described, the people in them are being, non-combative, but have done something that might be wrong. And so in that situation, well, a lot of police departments' way to do it is, from what I understand, is you gain control of the person's hands so that they can't further do something else wrong, depending on what it is, et cetera, et cetera. And in the case of the guy at the elevator, he was searched already. And so it's very confusing to me, how the police officers will gain control of the situation and then take it one step further, like to being physical, to punching people, all this other kind of thing. And when talking to people who are very much, back the blue in any situation, kind of people, and will always argue at the defense of these police officers, I think a tactic that I've seen that kind of works, I guess, for me sometimes, is actually talk through the situation. Well, ask them, like, well, what would you do in this situation? And, or, do you think that violence is warranted? Violence on the part of the police officer is warranted from nonviolent actions, etc. So I think that could be a good response. I've had a little bit of success with it, but it's just it's the prevalence of this, almost, of this back the blue of, they can do nothing wrong thing, I think it's troubling. And you have to acknowledge that these people are humans and that they can do some things wrong sometimes. And when they do some things wrong, the police departments have to act accordingly with that. And they have to, put them on probation or retrain, or in some cases even just fire them. And I don't think that's done enough. And I've had this relayed to me from other police officers, that it's from police officers, not other police officers. I'm not a cop. That it's very hard to actually get that done within a police department, to actually reprimand somebody. And I think that's and mostly because of cultural things, and then also because of the ways departments are set up in some cases. So I think that might contribute to some of this. What do you guys think?
I think absolutely. Have you guys seen that video going around where it's this guy set out, and I think it was in Florida, and he went and asked a bunch of different police departments if he could get a officer complaint form?
Yes.
Yeah, and he is met with some pretty brutal responses from a lot of these police stations, and I think that's exactly outlines what you're talking about here. Is it's just really hard to get, the people involved in this stuff, namely the police officers and the police departments, to take accountability.
It's not even that. It's actually, what I'm kind of talking about is, if is police officers that are actually in their same department, that it's very hard for them to actually bring paperwork forward to say, hey, this guy, and I saw this guy do some stuff that was against protocol, that was wrong, and I would like him to, to be reprimanded for that. Well,
so you mean in terms of like the bureaucracy of the process itself?
Exactly, like internal to the organization, not necessarily a civilian, a non-police officer, reporting a misconduct. I'm talking about another police officer reporting misconduct. It can be
right, and I'm sure that's going to make you the most popular guy in the department too.
Right, and that's why I mentioned cultural things. Is that it's kind of you went against the collective grain by doing that.
Well, that's actually the real thin blue line. What we're talking about there. That is the thin blue line where you don't go against your fellow officers, where you have to support your fellow officers, because it's hard out there, and it's us against them. I watch a lot of cop shows, so anyway.
Do you watch Live PD?
No, I haven't seen that one. I'm talking about like dramas and stuff like that. My mom and Blue Bloods. Oh my God, I have seen so much Blue Bloods. Yes, I live with my parents. Tough financial situation. I'm getting over it. Anyways, so I have seen so much Blue Bloods, and you see that kind of stuff on the shows, and of course, it on the show it doesn't necessarily glorify that, but anyways, back to what I was saying. That's the thin blue line where where you don't cross it, because you're going against your fellow officers if you do. And the fact that they've been able to capitalize on that, to market that, and get it to where regular civilians are now a part of that too. It's kind of disturbing a little bit.
It's cult-like behavior.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's kind of like with say like with the Catholic Church and its abuse scandals, where people didn't want to say anything bad about priests, and
right,
it's very similar, where people don't want to say anything bad about priests or about their pastors or whatever, that they're just in such denial that these people that are supposed to be leading them and protecting them in the case of ministry, spiritually, that they could do anything wrong. And it's a similar mindset with police now.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So we'll move on from the police topic. I know we could go.
Well,
on
I kind of had a
please.
funny story that was a pretty good segue. Please. So, some of my friends and I were sitting around, and it was during where there was like a public display of flag desecration somewhere. Somebody's burning flags and everything, and one of the guys I know, he kind of got mad about it, and saying like they're un-American and unpatriotic and stuff. And I looked at his shirt, and he's wearing a thin blue line shirt that was the American flag with the thin blue line on it. And I was like, so is discoloring a flag desecration? And he was like, well, yes. And then I was like, so putting a blue line on a flag is flag desecration? And then everybody's eyebrows kind of got like went up, and he was like, well, yes. And then I was just kind of like, okay, just wanted to throw that out there. But so that kind of segues into like objects. So like kind of like nationalism in general, kind of, but mostly a lot to do with like the flag and then the anthem. And Lonie mentioned, this was very similar to like the situation with priests and stuff. And to me, I think this really only occurred to me in the past couple years, but when I started to be a little bit more libertarian, I was I kind of noticed that this is kind of odd, that this is just really weird, and it's only something that you see in like a church or a place of worship, and that's the like kind of the respect that's given towards the flag, and then like the national anthem, everybody puts their hand on their hearts. It's almost religious, and
Yeah,
I'm not necessarily like saying that like you shouldn't do those things and that's a bad thing that you should do, but I think it's something to take note of, that this is kind of like a prayer or a hymn, and
totally.
that the flag is like an idol. I don't know.
Yeah, Gadsden just covered this in an episode of Liberty Bites. It's a new god. You can go check it out on their network. It should be a couple episodes down. But he pretty much touched on this exact whole thing, and it's absolutely something that's relevant in this conversation too. The American flag is a great example. It's tied so much and so heavily with the military and military service, and just the whole idea of nationalism, that people get really, really, really upset about when people have anything bad to say about their almighty skycloth. Get very, very angry. Anything about these items, these inanimate objects that have turned into sacred cows, from you, Lonnie or Caitlin?
So yeah, I mean, exactly like how Chris said, it's like a hymn. It's like it's almost like a prayer. The hand over the heart, the saluting could almost be seen as like putting your hands together in prayer. The flags could be seen at the little tiny flags that you wave, and other little banners and stuff could be seen almost as like rosaries or various other little items. It's you see these kind of things, and especially like if you have a religious upbringing like how I did, especially a very traditional religious upbringing where everything was so focused on different kind of items like medals and rosaries, and my mother, she still wears it, the like a veil, a mantilla, and there's just so many things like that, and then so you can take that and then apply that and make connections to all of these different things, and it's like this is like being in church all over again. It's kind of weird, and no one really has much of a problem with it. And I kind of think, and I'm not one of those people that, oh well, the degradation of society comes from people, leaving church and stuff like that. But sorry, but I kind of think that maybe when people started, as younger people and different generations back started kind of moving away from religion and more into secularism, that I think the innate almost need for a religion or spirituality or something like that was kind of projected onto nationalism, in a sense, that people needed a god of sorts, and they made the state their god. Because I mean, you can see, in like older movies and stuff, there was that kind of like American exceptionalism, a bit of the nationalism. But I think kind of at the time, like post depression and stuff, people were probably not really too proud of being Americans and stuff, because they were so, well, there was an economic depression which kind of left almost like an actual depression, mental depression upon these people. And then as time went on and generations kind of changed, I think that might be where a lot of this is coming from now, is that the people needed a new god of sorts. I hope that made sense.
No, it makes sense, and you raise an interesting premise. I don't think it's any mystery that there's now more people that aren't religious than there were before. I think that we can all probably agree with that. I'm not saying that no one is religious anymore, but I'm sure that 50 years ago, many more people on average in America were religious than they are now. And it's an interesting question to raise. Is that a direct result of this kind of almost worship of the state? I think it's a very interesting question. I think it's a relevant question to ask. The bothersome part for me about all of this is it's not necessarily that I'm at all against people being proud of where they're from. To assert that people shouldn't be would be a little ridiculous, right? You're just going to spend all your time pissed off because there's going to be people that are proud of where they're from. If they're in a good place in life, I don't see why they wouldn't be. And that's okay. But the problem is when it gets to this level where it's exalted so high that it's not so much of being proud, but it's being proud to the point of being completely blind to relevant criticisms and just totally shooting those down. And that's when it becomes bothersome for me because, nothing should be on that level of not being able to be questioned.
It's something that, like, if we go back to a lot of, the early days of the United States, the separation between church and state, and that was written in a letter by Thomas Jefferson and everything else, and that was something that was kind of in the forefront of a lot of the founders' minds, because if you look at the history in Europe at before the times that, or during the times that the Pilgrims came to the New World, was that the church was basically the propaganda machine of the state, and the church gave credibility to the king by saying, that he's his birthright by God, that he's king, and all that kind of stuff. So it was, but at that time there was kind of a, like, almost a separation. Like, people went to church, and then they knew that the king was the secular authority, but he also was endowed with divine powers. But, and like, kind of like Lonnie was saying, now it's diverted to where the state is in charge of education. And so education centers have almost become propaganda machines in some ways of government, and being able to shape voting blocks, like future voting blocks and things like that. So it switched from being the church to being a manifestation of itself, which was public education. So along with that, public education needed idols to worship. And I find it ironic that the Pledge of Allegiance was actually written by a socialist minister, Francis Belmay, and it's kind of a telling of that there's this kind of permeating religious theme to the devotion to a state.
Oh yeah. People are heavy into it. So you touched on something there that we can shift to, I think is absolutely another big sacred cow, and that's public education. People do not like it when you don't want to speak well of schools, and I think people have a lot of reason to not speak well of schools. These systems are only getting more broken, and that's just talking about the systems, right? That's just talking about the fact that, test scores are a little messy. I think everyone is familiar with why at this point, because these test score reports are only as good as the tests, and a lot of the people question the education in the first place. So if that's the case, then what good are test scores from an educational standard that is bullshit? And anyway, but all of that aside, the fact is, the fact that we pay taxes to fund public education, and then if you don't want to do it and you want to go to a private school, you essentially have to pay for school twice. It shouldn't be that way. It's it's a pretty messy thing with education and with teachers, and you get into that, and now they seem to be going crazy a lot with the pay. And this is it is an absolute byproduct of what happens when you have state control of an industry, right? You have a muted market signal, so you don't know what the value is of the people in these professions. Or we don't know because we don't even have a chance to see what people value it as, because the state sets that value for us, right? And they force it, and so you get all of these situations where things are just out of whack and they're falling apart at a really rapid rate. And we had Jack Lloyd on not long ago, and he was talking to us about schools. So we've heard a bit about it on this podcast before. But Caitlin, why don't you start? You tell us about kind of your opinion on public education and some of the interactions that you've had with people trying to maybe express some of this stuff that I just talked about.
Well, I mean, whenever you talk to people about public schools and alternatives to public schools, they kind of think you're insane, because that's all that's been around for, is at least as far as recent history goes, it's all we've had is public schools and the occasional private school that the rich kids go to. So they don't see that there's an alternative to it. So it's hard for them to engage in any kind of conversation relating to that. So I don't know, it's tough. They think that the government is the only one who can provide quality education. Free market will fail, and everyone will go back to one-room schools, and only the rich kids can go. But I don't know. It's a tough conversation to have, but I find that if you approach it with empathy and say, "Hey, I want everyone to be educated as well. Here's my idea to do this without, taking tax dollars and without the government controlling curriculum. Here are different ways to teach kids, because everyone learns differently, but yet we're all subject to the same style of teaching, and it doesn't work for everyone. So I find if you approach it with empathy and have actual valid solutions and alternatives, that people will listen.
Yeah, they generally do. A lot of times, like you mentioned, curriculum. A lot of times, if you start by talking about curriculum, that's helpful and it can open people up. So yeah, that can be helpful. Chris, how about you, bud?
Well, I definitely think that this is a good topic, and it's something like you mentioned curriculum. Well, a lot of people were opposed to like the changes with Common Core really recently, and that can be a pretty good talking point. And a lot of people are opposed to the different changes in like sexual education classes and things like that. So that can be a good segue into the conversation of like alternative types of schooling. Myself, and I think Lonnie actually, he mentioned before, um, I was actually homeschooled because of the my parents' kind of opposition to, or not necessarily opposition to different curriculums in the state education, but wanting to tailor the education of my education uh, better. But like you mentioned, Vinny, um, my mom had a teaching license and everything else, so she was learned in how to educate. But like you mentioned, Vinny, the you have to end up paying for school twice, and even if you don't have children, you have to sometimes pay state taxes to the school board in your area. And if they're building a new school, then well, if you're like me and you don't have children, then you still have to pay for that. And it's like, well, why? I don't use those services, so why do I have to pay for it? And so that's kind of getting into the unofficial core principle of libertarianism, taxation and stuff. But you know, um, I feel like homeschooling, it's with alternative solutions, it's like not one solution is right for everybody, and that's the point. Not everybody can homeschool their kids. Not everybody can afford to public school their their kids, and some people might be able to afford one public school and one and not the other. In fact, I was watching a couple months ago. I was watching the old school Cheaper by the Dozen, the one that was made in I think the 50s, and they actually go shopping for schools for like one of their kids because he's entering school age. And that's just something that would be completely unheard of nowadays. You know, Bastiat quoted it even back in the 1800s that if we disapprove of state education, then the socialists will object and say that we are opposed to any education at all. And I think that might be a common, not from socialists per se, but that's a very common thing when libertarians talk about opposing state education. Is it's not, and like Caitlin said, you have to be empathetic with it. It's not necessarily that we don't want children to be educated, but we want them to have education tailored to them in a better way. So, but
Right, exactly.
But don't
Yeah.
you dare insult it, because if you insult it, you insulted the the Sunday school of this deity called government.
Right. Well, and it's a tricky one, not unlike the military, because while you might not like the program or the construct of this the industry in itself, the people in it aren't the core issue, right? And so this is a place where people go and the kids go and they hang out with other kids, and the social aspect is good. And there are good people that want to be teachers for good reasons, right? This is a profession that you really can't fault anyone for wanting to follow. You know, it's a noble profession for people to have. So I think that plays a lot into it too, is there's a lot of people involved and there's a lot of things involved that aren't necessarily horrible things, or they're not necessarily horrible people. And so they think that when you have criticisms against the public education system, then you're criticizing these things that aren't horrible things that come from schools. And that's not the case at all, right? It's just that to say that things could be done better, or something could be more optimal, is not to say that everything involved with that thing is absolute garbage. It's just to say that there are some things that could be better about this system that we have. You know, Lonnie, how about you, man? Anything? I know you shared some of your opinions on the Jack Lloyd episode there, but do you have anything you'd like to contribute here?
Yeah. Like Chris said, yes, I was homeschooled. I was homeschooled the K through 12. I had a pretty standard, kind of rigid curriculum. It was tailored to me, but it was also kind of tailored more to my parents' preferences of what they wanted me to learn. But I do feel that I received a much higher quality of education than what I would have received from a public school, and I got it from a woman that had dropped out of high school at 17 and then got her GED like 20 years later. I don't know about 20 years later, but still, it was sometime later. And I mean, I'm not held back in any sort of way. Now, that being said, I don't necessarily think that homeschooling was the right choice for me. I personally would have rathered more of the social aspects of public school, but there was still a lot that that I feel was better by me being homeschooled. But we can look at different kind of things. Like how you say you criticize public education. You say things like, "Well, I don't have any kids, so why should I be paying for this?" Or why should I be paying? I have a 3-year-old. Why should I be paying for school now when she's not even going? And people, they say like, "Oh, well, you're being selfish. This benefits everyone, because if everyone is educated, then society runs better." And well, I mean, sure, but it's not my responsibility. And it's hard to get people to understand that. In fact, it's nearly impossible to get people to understand that other children are not my responsibility. If I see them in the street about to get hit by a car, yeah, I have to go and try to save that kid. But I don't have to pay for them to be educated. That's none of my business. I have no business saying what they need to learn. They have no business saying what my child needs to learn. So ultimately, education does need to be tailored to fit each individual child. Recently, I've been looking into like men's style videos and things like that. There's a couple YouTubers that I like, and they talk about how tailored clothing is ultimately going to be the best fit for you, no matter what your body is shaped like. And off the rack clothing typically doesn't fit you. And my daughter's trying to get my attention now. But off the rack clothing is not going to fit you very well, because no one has an off the rack body. Well, no one has an off the rack mind. No two minds think exactly alike. And to form that mind, the education does have to be, tailored to fit each individual. And there needs to be the availability of different educational models that people can choose for what's best for their child. And, that can come in many different ways. There's children with learning disabilities, children with autism, that they need something different. They can't function properly in the normal school system. There's children that they don't have any sort of disability, but they're just not good socially. They don't do well with other kids. Maybe they should be secluded. Not secluded, that's the wrong word, but maybe they would do better at home. There's yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Secluded.
Maybe they should be put in a box, locked up in an attic with chains.
What?
Speaking of which, did you hear about that? That was
What's
actually
that?
that there was like these timeout rooms in some public schools that were like literal pine boxes.
Oh my
Yeah.
God!
That sounds productive.
There was.
I didn't even.
No,
have
there
one
was
of
like
those.
schools in Iowa. Like pine boxes is a little bit. They were made out of plywood, yeah. But the thing is, they were like this little room, like this, with like a window, and it was like a little like cell thing.
At least they got a window, though.
Yeah, at least they got a window.
That is disturbing.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I mean,
thoughtful.
Yeah, it was a little bit.
Don't put me in the hole, boss. I don't want to go in the hole. Don't put me in that hole.
Yeah, but it was like literally like going in this like it looked like a solitary cell at a prison. It was a little bit weird.
What was it? Was it Shawshank Elementary School? I mean, what? I mean,
good times.
That is absolutely disturbing. I mean, no child should have to go through that, even at home. Even that's horrible.
Yeah, and they, as I understand, they were done away with, but the excuse was that it keeps other children from learning, and which like if a kid's really acting up and having a whatever it may be, an episode, that it keeps other kids from learning, which is true, but at the same time, it's kind of like, well, why do those measures have to be taken? It's because I feel like a lot of these institutions are shuffling kids through kind of like cattle. It's like, well, maybe that kid should get a little bit more individual attention, and I think that might be one of the issues, or that is one of the issues, not might be, that is leading to a lot of the school violence that we've been seeing, and that kids don't get as much individual attention and love as they used to. And I think that might be a byproduct of the education system in some way.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's been said that with prisons, if you lock people up like animals, then, well, you kind of
They start to act like
they
animals.
start to act like animals. I mean, if you start putting kids in little pine boxes, like animals, well, I mean, that's kind of expected, I suppose. Oh, that's terrible. I would be absolutely livid if that happened to my kid. I would be.
Oh, I'd be, yeah.
Wow, I can't imagine.
Hell would be raised.
It would be pretty heavy. We're running up against the end of it here. This time flies when you're having a good conversation. Is there any parting words you guys would like to share before we go? I'll start with Caitlin. We haven't heard from you in a minute.
I don't really have anything. No.
All right, fantastic. Lonie, Chris.
Just loads of fun tonight.
Yeah,
Sorry.
hey, no, it's all good. Lonie, Chris, anything from you guys before we get out of here?
Well, I think this is we covered a couple topics, but I mean, it's just it's interesting to note that it's these different rituals and these different things that you just find yourself doing, and then or because you're an American, kind of step back and kind of evaluate them and take a look at them, and see if it's really like if it goes against any of your actual principles, because actions can support principles, or they can go against them. And I feel like some of these are just a little bit odd to say that we have education centers that teach people how to be productive citizens, and then we have people who dress up in costumes and say that they represent government. And it would be completely weird if I went to my neighbor's house, took money from him, and said that I represent him. It's a little bit odd, and I think that's just some thinking points.
I like it. Those are good thinking points. Lonie, anything from you before we get out of here?
Well, I mean, I say that you're absolutely selfish, and your neighbor is selfish if he doesn't want to give up his money for the betterment of society.
For the greater good.
Yeah, for the greater good. No,
being selfish is for my greater good. So there.
No, I think we all pretty much covered it. But yeah, it's kind of like, to sum all of this up with education, with police, with everything. It's this weird worship. It's this weird cult-like behavior. It's this, like I touched on, it's almost like a religion. People have made a new god, and it's the state. You put in separation of church and state, and well, the state's like, well, we'll just become the church. So I don't know. It's how do you fight back against something like that? Whenever it's so ingrained. It's definitely an uphill battle, and it's one that I think we're going to be fighting for a very long time. And yeah, that's all I got.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And so I'll part with this. I've already said it prior, but I'll say it again. I'm not in a position to tell anyone that they can't be proud of something, and I'm not in a position to tell anyone that they can't view something as good. But I would implore anyone listening that might not have these inclinations otherwise. It's okay to question stuff. It's always okay to question anything, right? No one is perfect. Nothing is perfect, and nothing and no one is above questioning. You should be able to ask questions, and you should be able to give critical feedback. And if you have a conversation that doesn't allow for that, there's a problem. There's absolutely a problem, right? And so it's important that people are able to have conversations about these things in productive manners without, as was stated by Chris, right? Without saying, oh, so you're against education. So you hate teachers. Right? And so you hate kids, getting all of these social skills by hanging out with other kids. And that's not it at all. You can be critical and you can ask questions without it being that. And I think it's important to take a measured approach to these things and be rational when you look at this stuff and realize that being critical and asking questions doesn't mean that you hate everything about it, and it doesn't mean that anyone's attacking your principles or your views. Discourse is important. Conversation is important, and these things are important to discuss. All right, so you can check out our website at think-liberty.com. And don't forget to check out our store. We got the coolest shirts in the Liberty movement. We're making Liberty rad to wear again. And you can get our shirts pretty cheap, starting out at under $17. We got baseball shirts, t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, and more. So get in there. Buy yourself the most punk rock Rothbard and Hayek shirts you'll find on the internet. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ThinkLibertyTL, on Twitter at Think_Liberty, and we're at Steemit and Minds at Think_Liberty as well. We're on Instagram as Think Liberty, spelled in one word. And if you like this episode and you like our podcast, please tell a friend. The most effective way that we can grow this podcast is by word of mouth. Well, to our guests, thank you for letting us burn through your time for this episode. To our listeners, on behalf of everyone who joined me tonight, thank you for listening. And we hope you join us next Tuesday for another episode. Whether or not you like it, we'll probably be back again.